A beautiful morning and compliment of the season to our esteemed viewers. Welcome to yet another edition of Newspaper Headlines, reaching you from the Advent Cable Network Nigeria Television, ACNN TV. We'll be bringing to you stories this morning from different national dailies. I am Rachel Ibunu. I'll take it up from here with the Blue newspaper, and we'll start with the lead story. It says, Rep summons, Buhari off to Daura, absence sparks fresh row. And the kickers, we didn't act in error, House replies Malami. The service, Malami's comment worrisome, coming from PDP caucus. Service chiefs should address National Assembly, not Buhari. This is coming from an ex-minority leader. We are still waiting to hear from Mr. President, coming from Bajabiamila. Story can be found on page 6. Now to the picture to my left, two suspected kidnappers of U.S. citizen Aliyu Abdullahi, middle, and Aliyu Umaru, second right, being paraded by the police at the force headquarters in Abuja. This happened on Thursday. And the picture to my right is the former chairman of the defunct pension reform tax team, Abdurrashid Maina, collapses during his trial at the Federal High Court, Abuja, on Thursday. Below the picture, 2023, zoning not yet on PDP agenda. This is coming from the national chairman, Secondus. Says party still studying 2019 defeat. On the front page, it continues on page 6. On page 23, federal government crashes data price by 50%. Now to the bottom strip stories. Maina slumps revived back to court. See details on page 5. And still on that page, Buhari raises panel on Nigeria Czech Tech Transfer Park. Buhari raises panel on Nigeria Czech Tech Transfer Park. And on page 5 again, Rivers, Core arrested for killing keke driver over 100 naira Egunje. On page 5. Above the lead story, recession may last 3 years in Nigeria, coming from World Bank. And the story can be found on page 23. Page 7, APC postpones membership registration, revalidation to 2021. Shell employees cursing oil leaks for profit in Nigeria. That is a report, and the story can be found on page 23. Now to the last story on Blueprint newspaper. Getting Electoral Act amended, my top priority. Coming from the chairman, Yakubu, and the story is on page 7. Leadership Friday edition. The lead story, COVID-19. 286 pharmaceutical firms apply for CBN's 100 billion naira fund. Of technical committee targets 20 million vaccine dosage. 4 states account for 64% test. This is coming from PTF. Army suspends confab, confirms senior officer's death from virus infection. See details on page 4. And beside the picture, 2023 presidency, Jonathan free to seek PDP ticket, coming from the national chairman, Secondus. And the story starts from the front page, it continues on page 7. The bottom strip stories, stay clear of workers' pension. Stay clear of workers' pension fund, NLC warns governors. Story on page 2. Your undying faith in Nigeria indelible, NBF tells T.Y. Danjuma. Your undying faith in Nigeria indelible, NBF tells T.Y. Danjuma. And the last story on Leadership Friday edition on page 7. President Muhammadu Buhari inaugurates panel on Nigeria-Czech Rep Tech Transfer Pact. That story is on page 7. We move to Nigerian Trivia newspaper, and I'll take it above the masthead. Riot in Port Harcourt as policeman kills motorcyclist over 100 naira bribe. See story on page 27. Page 28. 16 killed on Abuja-Kaduna highway. Ganduje curses gunmen. Below the masthead, don't tamper with workers' pension, NLC warns government. See the story on page 29. On page 2, exorbitant airfares. Senate seeks government support for local airlines. How to curb corruption at seaports, coming from the Vice President Osibanjo, and the story is on page 30. The lead story, COVID-19 hits army, GOC dies. The kickers, COAS conference cancelled, participants directed to self-isolate. Buratai bars officers from attending son's wedding. El-Rufai directs civil servants for compulsory test, may impose another lockdown. Isolation centers geared for full work as Nigeria records 2,709 cases in 6 days. See details on page 3. Now, beside the picture, World Bank says 20 million more Nigerians may fall into poverty, withholds $1.5 billion loan until further devaluation. Story on page 6. On page 25, hoodlums attack Ogun State Assembly still maize. That story is on page 25. On page 2, alleged 2 billion naira fraud. Minor collapses in court. EFCC confirms arrest of son. The picture is that of the National Secretary, PDP, National Chairman and the National Organizing Secretary during a briefing to commemorate Secondo's 3rd anniversary as the National Chairman of the People's Democratic Party in Abuja. This happened on Thursday. And now the last story. Buhari's National Assembly no-show. Sign, no one is in charge. Buhari's National Assembly no-show. Sign, no one is in charge, coming from Secondus. And the story can be found on page 8. We move to New Telegraph newspaper. I'll take it from the top above the masthead. NLC to governors. Stay clear of workers' pension fund. Labour vows to mobilize forces against move. The story starts from the front page. It continues on page 4. Now on page 3. CBN flags off dry season rice farming. Targets 1 million hectares. Below the masthead. World Bank to Nigeria. Sustain reforms to avoid worse recession. See details on page 4. 2023. Why we can't zone presidential tickets now, coming from PDP. And the story is on page 3. Pension fraud. Judge adjourns trial of minor. Slums in court. Details on page 2. And on page 4, MTN, Globacom, Airtel, 9 Mobile crashed data price by 33.3%. Now to the lead story. Panic in army as general dies of COVID-19 in Abuja. The kickers: Buratai, principal staff officers, commanders go into isolation. COAS confab cancelled. Army chief bars officers from son's wedding. Details on page 2. Now below the picture. Reps to Buhari: ignore Malami, honor our invitation. The kicker: spokesman: we still have confidence in President's integrity. See the details on page 3. And now to the last story. Smog exposure increases risks of cardiac arrest. You can find that detail on page 8. We now pause to observe a short break. When we return, newspaper headline continues with more updates. Please stay tuned.
Every embargo of the enemy shall get out of your system, your business, your family, in the mighty name of Jesus.
Amen.
In every area of your life, God will grant unto you breakthrough.
So I don't know what your own situation is today. Is it economic? The Lord can heal it.
Amen.
This hour, every problem, every siege, whatever battle, sicknesses and diseases, we pack and go in the name of Jesus.
Amen. Help is going to come not from men, not from those places you've trusted or expected, but it's going to come from above. And if it's going to come from above, it's going to defy, medical science.
Stream live every Friday at 12 noon West African time.
Thank you for staying tuned. We shall continue with the Daily Trust newspaper, and I'll take it from the top, below the masthead. Gunmen kill 16 Kano travelers along Abuja-Kaduna highway. The details can be found on page 3. Police parade kidnappers of rescued American citizen. Lagos new airport terminal ready February. Now the lead story. COVID-19 spike. General Irefi dies. Buratai, senior officers in isolation. The kickers. Federal government accuses religious leaders of making gatherings breeding grounds. Second wave looms. Coming from Health Minister. El-Rufai threatens lockdown. That story is on page 5. Now below the picture, Maina collapses in court, fleeing son arrest. The bottom strip stories. Abandoned segment of Kano-Maiduguri Road gives commuters nightmares. Details on page 34. On page 36. Local Jakpata market traders count losses after flood. That is on page 26. Now on the last story. Nigeria, Czech signs technology transfer agreement. See details on page 8. We move to NigerianPilot newspaper, and I'll take it below the masthead. No one is in charge of Nigeria, says Wole Soyinka, and the details can be found on page 9. On page 7, why we are yet to decide on zoning, PDP chairman. The lead story, reps fire back, say members didn't act in error by inviting President Buhari. Insist parliament can invite anybody, including the president. Refer AGF Malami to Section 62 of the 1999 Constitution as amended. Challenge presidency to give reasons for cancelling Buhari's visit. See details on page 8. And now to the picture is that of, from right to left, Vice President Yemi Osinbajo, Director General and Chief Executive Officer NIMASA, Dr. Bashir, and Minister of Transport Rotimi Amechi, and Director General Bureau of Public Procurement Mamman Amadu during the launching of process manual on port operations at the Presidential Villa. And below the picture, government's tolerance of religious violence reason for blacklisting Nigeria. Government's tolerance of religious violence reason for blacklisting Nigeria. This is coming from US, and the story can be found on page 9. And now to the bottom strip stories. Finance East-West Road from Sovereign Wealth Fund, Wike tells federal government. Finance East-West Road from Sovereign Wealth Fund, Wike tells federal government. See details on page 5. Page 12. Army Council's COAS annual conference as GOC dies of COVID-19. Governor Duri tags IYC on resource control and true federalism. Details on page 8. And on page 9, Ghana's opposition party rejects election results. APC postpones nationwide membership registration. Details can be found on page 5. And the last story on NigerianPilot. Workers' Pension Fund not for borrowing. NLC warns governors. That story is on page 8. We move to People's Daily newspaper. I'll take it below the masthead. 2023. Why zoning of PDP presidential ticket is on backstage by Secondus. Says Jonathan. Others qualified to show interest. Details can be found on page 8. And now to the lead story. Workers' pension. NLC threatens mass protest if governors tamper with funds. See details on page 6. Now to the picture from left to right. The acting INEC chairman, Air Vice Marshal Ahmed Muazu, handing over to the INEC chairman, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, during the handing over ceremony yesterday in Abuja. Below the picture, Buhari raises implementation panel on Nigeria Czech Republic Tech Transfer Pact. Details on page 3. And now to the bottom strip stories. Reps move to put railway on concurrent legislative list. Details can be found on page 5. Page 3. Alleged 2 billion naira fraud. Minor slums in court. Kano Economic City Market ready January. Coming from officials, and the story can be found on page 6. Now to the last story. Zamfara by-election. APC to drag ANEC IGP to court. Zamfara by-election. APC to drag INEC IGP to court. See the details on page 14. We move to Nigeria News Direct newspaper. I'll take it above the masthead. Alleged 2 billion naira fraud. Minor collapses in court during resumed hearing. Weak asset quality looms in Nigerian banking sector. Coming from Fitch. And the details can be found on page 2. Page 16. WAP reiterates commitment to establishing ECOWAS electricity market. coming from the chairman, Abdulaziz. Now to the lead story. 2023, Jonathan orders free to seek for PDP ticket. Coming from Secondus, says Buhari afraid to face Nigerians. Details can be found on page 3. And we have this from left to right is the Director of Finance Services, Nigerian Communications Commission, NCC, Yakubu Konto, Director, Corruption Monitoring and Evaluation Department, Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission, ICPC, and others during the inauguration and induction of the NCC Anti-Corruption and Transparency Unit, ACTU, yesterday, December 10, 2020, in Abuja. We have this of COVID-19 as of yesterday, 10th December 2020. 675 new cases confirmed. Total confirmed cases 71,344. Discharged 65,474. Deaths 190 cases so far. Beside that update, incessant fire, Governor Ayotola to restructure Ife Central Market. Dambata advocates usage of assistive technologies for persons with disabilities in telecoms. And the last story, population census. Nasarawa remains most shortchanged state. Nasarawa remains most shortchanged state, coming from Engineers, that's the governor, and details can be found on page 8. All right, and that is the much we can bring to you on today's edition of Newspaper Headlines. Thank you for giving us audience. Jeremiah 11:29 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for warfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." In times like this, trust the leading of the Lord, and your expectations will not be cut short. Have a wonderful weekend and remain blessed. Bye. By design. On this show, we focus on the journey from girlhood to womanhood and everything in between. You are worthy by design.
Marriage is the institution which God established. It is such an important institution that nobody should enter carelessly or unadvisedly.